By its very nature, ghostwriting is a more expensive service than editing could ever hope to be. Ergo, I get fewer ghostwriting questions and certainly less orders than I do for editing. There's nothing surprising about this, but recently I got a spate of them all at the same time. 3, to be exact. One is your run-of-the-mill ghostwriting job, nothing unique about it, just a classic nonfiction that I'm going to be writing for a client. But the other 2 were somewhat different. The other 2 were ghostwriting inquiries, but the thing that made them different is that both of these clients had already hired a ghostwriter for what they were looking for, and both of them had paid a great deal of money to get something back that was all but useless. One of them was a straightforward memoir about his experiences in looking for his birth family as an adopted person. The first ghostwriter had turned it into a very salacious, fictionalized version of his birth mother's life. It was problematic to be sure, but it was something that I could fix, and the amount of money I had to charge him since I wasn't starting from scratch was not astronomical. It was a fairly straightforward job. However, the third ghostwriting inquiry is something that kept me up at night. The reason? This client in question wanted a fiction novel created. He hired someone to create a fiction novel for him and paid $20,000 for it. The dollar amount is not outrageous. I want to specify that. If you're paying someone to write 80,000 words from scratch, including plot points, character arcs, all of that, that's not a bad dollar amount. More than I charge, but you know, it's fair. However, what he got back was the most unreadable trash I have ever seen in my life. And if you've been following me for any amount of time, you know that's pretty bad. That's $20,000 he lost, and he didn't have it to lose. So he couldn't even hire me to fix the trash that the first person had done. The best I could do was give him an outline and send him on his way so he could maybe write it himself. So the question is, who should be using a ghostwriter in the first place, and how do you not get scammed? Let's find out, shall we? Hello, shameless writers. I'm Kristen McTiernan, the nonsense-free editor, here for your regular dose of writing wisdom. And the topic of this week is ghostwriting. Now, like I said before, ghostwriting is not a terribly popular service, and for good reason. It is exceptionally expensive, and if you saw my videos on should I quit writing and why I can't quit writing, you know that even with all of my marvelous expertise, I have barely broken even on these 6 novels I have published. They're good. I can objectively say that. They just don't sell very well. And most fiction writers are in that same boat. When you meet someone who is a successful self-published author, one of 2 things has happened. Either A, they're one of those people who is really good at working the algorithm. They have that data-driven mind. They have that software, and they can write to market and follow those trends and ensure that they're hitting those sales and pump out books quickly enough to keep their name up there in the algorithm. I'm a slow writer, and I'm not writing about sexy fairies. I'm not doing it. The second option is that they have an existing platform. Maybe they started off in fan fiction. There's a great many independently published authors who started off in fan fiction. They already had a community of people who love to read them. Or maybe they had a fiction newsletter and they had 1,000, 5,000 people that they sent little snippets of their fiction to who were ready and willing to pay money for their book. I applaud all of these authors, regardless of what genre they write in, and, you know, maybe I don't read that genre because it's trash, but you know what? I'm glad that you're making your business work for you. So the hackles on my back always go up just a little bit when I get an inquiry into ghostwriting fiction. This is a very unusual request, and though I do offer the service, I do want to specify that I will only accept orders from people that I know will make their money back from the cost of hiring me. So when a fiction author hires me to ghostwrite, It is because they have a platform, and more often than not, they are members of the Book a Month Club, which means they produce a full-length novel every month. Yes, they do. And part of the way that they do that is they hire ghostwriters like me. I have absolutely no hesitation in taking these people's money, and I work very hard to make sure that the book that I produce is in line with their previous works in terms of tone and quality. That's very important. They're my client, and I am here to serve them. But I'm sure you understand those people are in the minority. So if you are a fiction writer and you're thinking, I should hire a ghostwriter, allow me to be the one to dissuade you. Because though I will refuse you, person without a platform and no previously published books, not everyone is so scrupulous. The client that I spoke about in the preamble spent his entire savings, $20,000, on this ghostwriter, and the unreadable trash they produced, oh my God, it was so bad, you guys. It was so bad. It wasn't just the writing itself that was trash. There was no plot. There were no characters. Details shifted. For instance, one scene started where they're in a space station and the word ship refers to a spaceship, which is normal for a sci-fi book. But then 2 pages later, we're actually looking at diesel sea ships firing cannons at each other. How did we get onto these ships? Where did this ocean come from? It was insane. It was the worst thing I've ever... Oh my God. So how did this client get into this mess? How did it happen? Okay, 2 things. One, the client was not engaged in the process. The client just handed over their money. The client said, you have absolute freedom. Here's my rules. Don't make any misogynist, caregiving female characters. That was like the only guidance he gave. And here's the social point that I want to make. One of those sweeping sci-fi epics. So of course he had a social point because that's what those books are about. But there were no details given. And so I asked, okay, well, how often did the author send you their work? Was it in chunks of 5,000 words? Was it in chunks of 10,000 words? None. No. Okay. So you waited 3 months. You got no feedback. You had no check-ins from this person. This person delivered their finished work, and you didn't even read it until a full month after the job had been delivered. Now, he used Fiverr, which is the platform that I primarily use. The way that it works on Fiverr is after I deliver the job, you have 3 days to ask for revisions. If you don't, it's automatically marked complete, and the money is set to be delivered to me. 3 days is enough time to decide whether or not you want revisions. So we didn't check it. And then when he did try to contact the buyer, the job was already marked complete. And so they didn't respond to him. So it's very easy to blame the client, but really the quality of work was so bad, I still felt very bad for this client. And I call him a client, but obviously he had spent all of his money. He didn't have enough money to hire me to write him an actually good book. And even if he did, I would have told him no. He had no books to his name. He didn't have a clear idea of what he wanted this book to be about. He had no sales plan. He had no marketing plan, nothing where he could point to an ROI saying, okay, I'm going to spend, let's see, for that word count, I probably would have charged him $12,000. That sounds about right. He had no knowledge of how he was going to make that money back. So no, I'm not going to do that. That is a recipe for an unhappy client. And what good is that $12,000 going to do me if he leaves me a bad review because I didn't make my money back? Now, granted, I did not promise you that you would make money on the book that I wrote you. I only promised you it would be good. But people go in with very interesting expectations. And there was no way that I or anybody else could have met his based upon the lack of prep work that he'd done. All that to say, ghostwriting is best saved for nonfiction writers. So let's talk about my other 2 ghostwriting clients. The first is a person who plans on running for local office when it comes around time for the next election cycle. He's very excited about it, he has a plan, and he wants to have something that he can point people to if they have questions about his platform, or who he is, or what he thinks about the world in general. The book that he wants to write is largely informational in nature, not so much an advocacy book, which to my mind is actually very refreshing. It's a little bit harder for me to write because it does actually require research into the issues, but I'm glad to be doing it, and it's an excellent way that he can spend money. His ROI is not going to be in book sales, because I imagine he's probably going to be giving a lot of these books away for free at his campaign events. His ROI will be in name recognition and, hopefully, people checking his name come election day. That's his ROI. That is a very good reason to hire a ghostwriter, and probably if you've ever read a book by a political candidate, we can probably be assured that a ghostwriter did write that for them. The next most common, oddly enough, is memoir. You wouldn't think that someone who wants to write a memoir, either about themselves or about a loved one, would hire a third party to write it for them. But you'd be wrong. My very first ghostwriting client was wanting a book about her father, and it didn't have to be a long book. She wanted to tell his story, and she wanted to talk about her advocacy for people who have the illness that ultimately took him. Her ROI, likewise, would not be in book sales because, again, most likely she would be giving a lot of copies of her book away at speaking events, or while she was having small group events where she and other people who had experienced losing a parent to this illness were discussing their mutual struggle. The memoir that I'm working on right now is a little bit different. This person plans on making his ROI back in book sales and ultimately optioning it to TV or movies. Now, the good news about this, almost everybody wants their book to be optioned into a TV or a movie, particularly those who write memoirs. But unfortunately, not everybody has the ingredients, I guess we'll say, for a compelling memoir. This guy does. And it's kind of exciting to be a part of that. It does put a little bit of extra pressure because not only are agents going to be seeing the book that I'm writing, but ideally speaking, even like script Hollywood people would also. His is the kind of story that Oxygen or Investigation Discovery, like even if it was just a miniseries, this would be a really good story. And so that kind of adds to the excitement, and I'm really glad to be working on his book. So for those two clients that I'm working on right now and the previous client that I worked on at the end of last year, I believe that they spent their money wisely on me. The question is, what would the criteria be for you to spend money wisely on a ghostwriter? First and foremost, you're writing nonfiction. Or, alternatively, you are a prolific fiction writer with a rabid audience and you're falling behind on your output and you need to hire me. But let's be honest, if you're watching my videos, you're probably not in that camp. That's okay. So we'll just stick with the nonfiction for now. 2, you have an idea of what success looks like and a plan to achieve that success. That success isn't necessarily getting money from your books. Maybe it's just building up your platform, having something to hand out at speaking engagements, or even you're okay with spending the money and just having a gift to give to your family. Only you can decide what to you is the ultimate outcome of this book and what will make it worth it spending $5,000 to $20,000 for someone to write your book for you, depending on how much research is needed, how many words, etc. A lot goes into those calculations. And finally, 3, is it more valuable to you to spend the money than it is to spend the time? Most of what we do here on this channel is dissect the elements of plot and characterization and what makes a story worth telling, and what makes a story well executed and what makes it poorly executed. All of these things take a lot of time to learn, let alone master. And most author tube channels will tell you you have to be prepared for your first draft to suck. And then you have to show it to people. And then they're going to give you feedback. And then you're going to make it suck a little bit less. And then you're going to rewrite it. And then you're going to show it to different people, etc., ad infinitum. If you're running for office in 2024, boy, you sure don't have time for all that nonsense, especially if you have your regular day job like my current client does now. Or if you're a person who is running your own company and you're just kind of telling a side quest, like my other client, he's still the CEO of a company. He does not have time to sit down and write this and make it good and make it sound the way that he wants to. So for him, it's worth it. The question is it worth it for you to spend the money, or would you be better served by putting in the time? Only you can answer that question, but it is an important question and one that should be considered before you even start looking for a ghostwriter. Once you do hire a ghostwriter, it is important to understand what the process should look like. Like I said, I work on Fiverr and I don't know how other platforms do it. But for me, if I'm working with a job that large, I always use the milestones feature. I do not do the single payment feature, meaning you pay the money, you place your order, and then you don't see anything until I deliver it all to you in its finished form at the end. For me, that is a recipe for unhappiness when you are composing original text for a client that may or may not be in line with what they want. If the platform you're using allows milestones, make sure that the ghostwriter that you're using uses that option instead of the single payment option. Even if you do have the money just right now, there's no reason to pay it all at once and then be surprised at the end by something that's not quite what you were looking for. Number 2, I understand that a lot of people don't like to talk on the phone. That's fine, I guess, but if you're going to be shelling out all that money, you need to have a call with this person. If the person is completely unwilling to have a Zoom call with you, cameras off, it's okay, I get it, not everybody is all about appearing on camera. But you need to be able to talk to this person, to hear the cadence of their voice, to hear how confident they are in their skills, to let them hear the enthusiasm in your voice as you describe your project. The client that I'm working with right now, where I'm fixing the memoir, where the ghostwriter had turned it into this salacious, fictionalized nonsense, she refused to get on a call with him, not even once. She was like, oh, just tell me what you want in the chat. And his thought was, well, if I'm going to be the one writing out all these notes, I may as well write the book. And she added all of those fictionalized elements, some of which, by the way, rose to the level of slander and could have gotten him sued if he had printed that book. Holy heavens. I suspect she did that because she needed to fill out her word count and she didn't want to talk to him to get more information. That's not acceptable. So depending on your level of how much you enjoy actually talking to people, fair enough, you don't want to have regular Zoom calls with them, but you need to have at least one to make sure that you're both on the same page, to make sure that this is a real person and a native speaker. Yeah, because a lot of people type a lot better than they speak. Always use a native speaker, by the way. Wherever you're publishing, that's where the person needs to be natively from. If you're writing in Great Britain, hire you a British person. You should not be hiring me. Even though I lived there as a child, I'm going to misspell something, and maybe the tone isn't going to be quite right. Get you a British girl. And then finally, when the job is delivered, review quickly. If you want changes, ask for them immediately. Do not allow them to languish. Don't just assume the goodwill of the person. Okay, this is a business transaction. Don't just assume that you can come back 2 months later and be like, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't like it. No. Read it thoroughly as soon as they deliver it. Compile your feedback and ensure that they make the changes that you want until you have the product that you want. That's the beauty of using platforms like Fiverr, so you can make sure you come away with the project as you want it to be. You don't want to have a product that has potential but isn't great. You could have done that yourself. So those are my tips for how to manage a ghostwriter. If you are not at all interested in having a ghostwriter and don't know why anybody who would, I actually have a whole playlist about how to self-edit your own work. Thus, while you're writing your own work, you don't have to pay as much for an editor because you will have done some of the heavy lifting yourself. So until next week, take care and write well.